Hi, everybody. This is Dan Stolberger. Welcome to this week's Middle East update. It is May 14th, and we're going to look back upon the events of this week. We always start with our news bites, but just a reminder that this PowerPoint that's behind me is available as a link on the YouTube page. So make sure you click that, then you get the whole thing without my head in the way. Okay, our news bites for this week. Israeli officials are worried that President Trump is going to grow tired of all the talks, all the delays, and he's going to cut a deal, essentially any deal, with last minute concessions. And so that's reality. That's what the fear is. Again, as news bites, we just sort of hop through different things that have transpired this week. Israeli elections, okay? It looks like they're going to be either in September or October. And the question is that what really drives the Israeli ballot? And the answer is the 10 commandments of Israeli politics. Commandment number 1 is security. Number 2, security. Number 3, security. You get the point. It's a matter of security. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton essentially says that the negotiations with Iran over, you name it, is simply a waste of oxygen. And it seems that he's got some insight there. Netanyahu's coalition has already submitted a bill to dissolve the Knesset. As we mentioned, looks like early elections, the earliest would be September. We know that Trump is in China, and his word to Fox was that the Chinese leader has offered to help with the Iranian issue. He's promised not to transfer them military equipment, and he wants to see the Strait of Hormuz remain open. And of course, the Iranian foreign minister then said the Strait of Hormuz is open for anyone that isn't an enemy of Iran, and you just need to pay the tolls. And then finally, the U.S. Army, in an official announcement, has stated that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are now completely cut off from Iranian weapons, from supply and support. Now, for our major articles this week, May 14th, happy 78th and happy 59th. May 14th, 1948 is considered the birthday of the modern state of Israel. On that day, when the British mandate officially ended, David Ben-Gurion stood in the Tel Aviv Museum Hall and read out the Jewish state's Declaration of Independence in a speech that was broadcast literally around the world. And so that marks the day, 78 years ago. Can a nation be born in a day? Yes, Isaiah, it can. And then on the Jewish calendar, it just so happens that today is Jerusalem Day. It's marked as the 28th day of the Hebrew calendar of Iyar, and it just so happens to fall on May 14th this year. So today, Israel celebrates the 59th anniversary of Jerusalem's reunification. In 1967 of the Six-Day War, after being divided for 19 years, the old city that the Jordanians held was now in the hands of Israel, a prophetic and biblical fulfillment of the words of Psalm 122:3, which says, Jerusalem is built as a city that is compact together. Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel, not divided. Now some sobering news, which is the article that's entitled The Latest, and a question mark as far as U.S. support. I'm going to read this in its entirety. I think it's important for us to hear. Reminded that your high gas and your food bill, you're being reminded constantly that it's all due to a war that America should not be fighting. The daily message that's getting louder and louder by the day is essentially that this conflict with Iran, as long as it lingers, is due to Bibi Netanyahu and the Israelis forcing Trump's hand. And so many are getting weary, and they no longer see the upside of remaining Israel's close friend and ally. Waning support is growing the opposite direction. CNN displayed the numbers showing that Israel's losing support from both the Democrats and the Republican parties. Over a 4-year time span, 36 points. In the broadcast that's called Morning Joe Scarborough said that he never thought in his lifetime he'd see a day when a majority of Americans were in favor of ending economic and military support to Israel. But this should not catch us off guard, because it was the prophet Zechariah, chapter 14, that makes it clear that the day will come where Israel will stand alone. And so that's where we're at. Just seeing the sand running out of the hourglass. How much longer will the U.S. support and stand with Israel? And then another troubling article, Iranian Nukes. Energy Secretary Chris Wright warned on Wednesday that Iran is, quote, frighteningly close to developing weapons-grade enriched uranium. You might say, wait a second, I heard it's all buried. Not so. If you remember, Steve Witkoff publicly claimed that Iran boasted about having about 60% enriched uranium, enough to make 11 nuclear bombs. Bottom line is that they still have a substantial amount of enriched uranium, let alone the 11 tons that are buried, and who knows whether or not we're going to be able to get that or not. So again, we're close, and it'll be interesting over the next month, I guess you would say, because there still is a weaponization sort of process that happens after the uranium's enriched to a certain degree, but they're quite close. And that's a quote that he told this Energy Secretary Chris Wright told our Senate Armed Services Committee this week. And then Marco Rubio, again in China at this time, and his statement simply is this to Fox News on the Air Force One on the way over. Rubio says the situation with Iran is irreconcilable. As I mentioned in a interview for Fox News, he says Iran is an example of a bilateral issue that is irreconcilable. Their cleric regime wants a nuclear weapon, and the world, led by Donald Trump, says that can't happen. That is a stalemate. And again, we've talked about this before. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and yet it's a matter of principle for them. They're dumbfounded in all these negotiations, and we reported on this last week, that the Americans cannot understand that Iranians are willing to die over this issue. It's jihadist. So that's where we stand. Washington is hoping that Beijing will act against Tehran through the United Nations, possibly next week. And again, as Trump is going to say, China wants to help, but we're going to have to wait and see. That's this next article that says Trump and China. Trump knows that the one that's keeping Iran alive today is, and even though it's sort of done quietly, is China. They're the ones that are still trading with the Iranians. They get 90% of the Iranian oil. They're the ones providing them with intelligence and even certain types of weaponry. For the Chinese, it's kind of an upside down thing. For example, air defense batteries are considered offensive weapons, and ballistic missiles are somehow defined as defensive weapons. So go try to figure that one out. So again, as Israel has set a goal, in a sense, to break that Middle East axis of evil with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis or whatever, Trump looks at that and says, you know, if I can kind of break up that China, Russia, Iranian, North Korean axis of evil, if somehow he can disconnect the Chinese from that axis, he will weaken it significantly and bring it closer to the goal that he desires. And, you know, that sort of, hey, we're two world powers, let's get along. We're going to have to wait and see how all that transpires, because that is happening in negotiations and discussions right now. So now we, every so often we need to look over our shoulders and take a look at Hamas. And we're hearing different reports about what's going on Hamas. On one hand, we're hearing that they're strengthening themselves. We're hearing that they're refusing to lay down their arms. This report is the other side of that coin. And it questions, is time working against Hamas? Internal power struggles, mounting pressure from the public, Gaza's public sector, their frustration over the conditions in the Strip are shaking the terrorist organization, their rule, as Israel continues to expand its control on the ground. And meanwhile, Hamas is struggling to figure out who's going to be in their leadership after the elimination of all their key figures. And then, again, no words. No words, an article that I, again, need to read in its entirety. A 300-page report documenting Silence No More. That's the name of the report. 300 pages long, documenting the sexual violence committed against Israelis on October 7th. Testimonies, video, photographic evidence of the atrocities. And friends, let me just tell you this. What you've heard and what you've seen released is nothing in comparison truly to what took place. And so now that this has been released, the response and its coverage to AP, the Associated Press, downplayed the documented atrocities while amplifying allegations against Israel, thus shifting the focus away from the victims. And again, it's just like Holocaust denial. They're casting doubt on the evidence that's been given. And then the New York Times. The New York Times, on the night before this most comprehensive evidence, reckoning the documentation of what Hamas actually did, the commanded, directed sexual terrorist, the New York Times ran an opinion, an op-ed by Nicholas Kristof, titled "The Silence That Meets the Rape of Palestinians." The timing was not incidental. It is the story. Netanyahu has basically instructed the Attorney General to sue the New York Times which this article in a sense accuses Israel of sexual abuse of Palestinian prisoners. The craziness of suggesting that they've trained dogs to rape the prisoners. The quote is, "It's one of the most horrifying and distorted lies ever told against the state of Israel." The New York Times essentially admitted that there was no fact-checking done whatsoever, including, as I mentioned, the unbelievable accusations of dog raping Palestinians. Again, no words. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the days in which we're living, in which there will be, and there is to this day, strong delusion. And then again, let me step away so you can see this in its entirety. This isn't Germany under Hitler in 1938. This is France in 2026 doing what? Blaming the Jews for the high gas prices at the pump. Okay, my friends, that's the report for this week. I always try to hold off as long as I can because things are ever changing. And so with that, just a reminder, God is still, as he's always been, in control of this doomsday chessboard setup. God is in control. We're told to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we do that. Be praying for the leadership. Be praying for those that are innocent victims as well. In all the countries, Palestinians, Iranians, the Houthis, Hezbollah, the Lebanese, we pray for the innocents as well. But we stand with Israel this day. God bless you and shalom.